I'm going to record to the cloud. Alrighty, I think we are live here. So, hey everyone, this is Paul Grand, CEO of MedTech Innovator. Welcome to another episode of MedTech Innovator Live. This is part of our MedTech Innovator Accelerator. It's our program that we do for some of the leading startups in the entire world. And one of the great things about MedTech Innovator is that we share a lot of the content that the accelerator gets to participate in with anyone who's out there on YouTube who wants to tune in, or LinkedIn if you're watching it from there. Wherever you are, we're happy to have you here. Just a quick ground rule for those of you who are on YouTube or anywhere else. If you're not here in our Zoom, your vehicle for asking questions is the little YouTube chat box. We'll have one of my team members monitoring that. And if there's any questions that they see, they'll pass them along to me, and I'll try and ask our panelists as best I can. But besides that, we're just going to be talking for the next hour about one of the many topics that's incredibly important for medical device innovators or medtech innovators or digital health innovators or diagnostic innovators, is manufacturing, is supply chain, engineering. These are things that oftentimes, it's not that they're an afterthought. I mean, the device is the primary thing you're building, so that's hardly an afterthought. But some of the downstream impacts of your decisions can be an afterthought, and we don't want that to be the case. So we're going to do our best today to give you some tips and some hints and some things that we think will just help you shorten your process and avoid some mistakes. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our panelists for today. We've got three experts who are going to help us understand how to avoid some of the problems, some of the things that I was just mentioning, and even just, hopefully enlighten us a little bit about a subject that I think doesn't get enough airtime. So with that, I'm going to go through and introduce each of our panelists. In order, I'll start off here with Jim Warren, who is the Business Unit Director at Jabil. Jim, who's been a partner of ours for years. All of you are our partners, but Jim, great to have you here. Tell us a little about yourself and about Jabil.
Thanks, Paul, for having me today. Always excited to join these. Always a eventful chat. And I'm with Jabil. As Paul mentioned, we're the largest manufacturer of medical devices in the world. A lot of people ask, how do you get a Jabil? It's just James and Bill. You push them together, you get a Jabil. I'm in the business unit, which is an area where I go off and chase business, but then I also have to manage that P&L, which makes Jabil, who's a $33 billion company, often feel like a small shop. Been with Jabil 24 years now and been doing medtech for 3 years. So excited to be here today for the conversation. Thanks for having me, Paul.
Great having you here, as always, Jim. And you've been at this company for, what is it, 24 years, something like that?
Yes, sir.
So you must like it. It must be a good place to work.
It's addicting.
It's addicting. Well, I'm glad you've chosen to stay there. Let me move on then to Josh Magazin, Business Unit Director for Fujikura. Is that Josh?
Yeah. So Fujikura is obviously a Japanese company, I think, as you may have guessed by the name. We have a 137-year history in a number of technology fields, and including automotive and aerospace and electrification, consumer electronics. And medical is I'd say it's a newer direction for a 137-year-old company. We've only been doing it for a decade or two. But our idea is that we apply some of these advanced technologies, advanced materials that we come up with oftentimes in other arenas and bring them into the medical space, specifically usually to look at imaging solutions or miniaturization solutions and product enhancements for our customers.
Terrific. And we're going to get into all that in a little bit. Now, you said the company is it's over 100 years old. And I remember that one of my favorite stories too is that, it started as what? What was the origin of the company?
Yeah, so we started as a manufacturer of belts for kimonos, and we unfortunately no longer offer that product. But
Great.
if you really need a belt for your kimono, Fujikura can send you one, I'm sure.
Excellent. Well, we may take you up on that at some point. All right. Let's go to Eric Johnson. So Eric Johnson is the COE at Rev1, now part of Asahi Intech. Tell us what a COE is and tell us about yourself, Eric.
A COE is a mistype. I'm actually CEO of Rev1 and co-founder of Rev1 Engineering.
I'm sorry. I apologize for that. That's hilarious. I was like,
No
CEO.
CEO.
I apologize. CEO.
Yeah. So thanks for having me here. I think that this is a unique experience in that I have these conversations with our startup clients all the time. So it's kind of nice to have it repeated to many people at the same time. So it should be fun and a great conversation with the group we have here. Rev1 Engineering was started around 15 years ago, and it was a unique time because it was around the 2007 timeframe where funding for startup companies was a little more difficult, and we created this company in really a need that a lot of the people we had worked with at Guidance, Stryker, Boston Scientific, where I'd worked, had split off and started startup companies. And there was a need to develop products in a more efficient, fast way. And the standard was that, these startups would get funded with and have a CEO, co-founder, they'd start getting engineering, they'd lease a large space. And by the time you even get started developing a product, you're 4 months, 5 months into it. And so we kind of created the remote engineering team that develops products for the startups that we already have all that systems. We have HR, we have the personnel, we have the people ready to go. We have the design systems in place. We have machining, we have all the stuff you need. And so our kind of claim to fame is doing first in kind type devices. So we're very comfortable doing things that haven't been done before, and then being able to get started right away. So if you contract with us, we're going to get started right away and start moving forward. And now that we've partnered with Asahi Intech, it's allowed us to expand into what we call strategic manufacturing, where we've been a design company for years. We call it design and innovation. We've added strategic manufacturing because, I saw a need in the market. We've transferred almost all our product to contract manufacturers for years. And we saw in that, there is a gap there. There's a big gap between going from design to commercialization. And there needs to be help there in cooperation with us, with large contract manufacturers. There is that gap to get you to the right staged manufacturing. And right stage might be different than scaling. And so I think we'll talk about that in this session. So I'm happy to be here.
Excellent. Happy to have you here, and glad that you're the CEO and not the COE.
Yeah, me too.
That's terrific. All right, so we're going to talk about a whole bunch of stuff today. I'm going to go as fast as I can through a lot of different topics because we only have an hour for the YouTube audience, and then we've got 30 minutes of Q&A with our company. So and we've only got 50 minutes left, so we're already 51 minutes to go. So let's dig into a couple of things. I thought we'd do something I've never done before today, but I want to play a quick word association with you guys. So for all of you, and I'm going to go in order. I'll go Eric, Jim, and then Josh. I'm going to say a word or phrase here, and you just say the first thing that comes to mind. Supply chain.
Transitory problems.
All right. Jim.
Opportunity.
Josh.
That's a good one. Unsettled, I would say.
Unsettled. All right. I was thinking words like disruption, resiliency, and other things are coming to my mind when I think about supply chain. But that's great. I like where you guys are going. Okay. So with that as a little bit of some initial ground here for us to start talking about. What I want to do is talk, as I throw out disruption, but and Josh, I think you said unsettled. I believe, and I just want to quickly dispel a myth that yes, we have a lot of changes that have happened in supply chain, and there's a lot to be concerned about and a lot to be aware of, and I think there's a lot of great opportunity, as Jim put it. But I look at the quarterly reports, and Tesla's getting their EVs to market, and iPhone's got new iPhones coming on the market, and no one's saying, "Oh, sorry, they're delayed 2 years." So things are being built, things are being shipped, things are being manufactured. is there, is there a crisis is it only for them? Is it just the big companies that get to still, do things on time? Or can the little guys get away with it too? Can startups still have a predictable supply chain? Just generically as a topic here. And I'm gonna start with Jim because you're the largest manufacturer. So I'll start with you, Jim, and just tell us for these startups, are they in trouble because only the big guys are going to dominate everything now, or is there still hope? Jim.
There's still hope, Paul. I'll start with that. So I know there's always a lot of questions about this space. Jabil released their Q4 supply chain review this morning, actually, and I read through it. It's pulled together by one of our vice presidents of procurement, Graham Scott. He reports into our chief procurement officer, Frank Mackay, arguably the best supply chain organization in the world. And that's looking out from a lot of different spaces. And when I talk to our supply chain folks, yeah, big people are having issues, small people are having issues, but it's driving a different mentality of how you solution that. And I don't think that anybody is getting left behind. One of the things that we've been told by suppliers is more visibility is better. We really got to see what you have coming out. So it used to be you gave someone 6 to 12 months of forecast. If you want to get in line with these suppliers and be considered as a real customer, they're looking for 18 months. And I know that can be hard to do for startups, but I also think it drives some opportunity for you to kind of re-envision your device a little bit and get away from some of those large form ICs that are still a problem. So those are the ones that are still giving us issues, but there's a lot of commodities in the space right now that for the first time, we're seeing it loosen up. And so that's a good sign. So I'm cautiously optimistic and excited about how things are going to progress going forward, but I don't think startups are going to get left behind, in my opinion.
Good. I'm glad to hear that. As I said, I'm going to try and go through a whole bunch of different topics, so I don't expect everybody to answer every question here. But if you do want to chime in, if there's anything you guys want to add, you're welcome to wave at me, and I can call on you. I'm going to go to Eric for a second here because I know you talked a lot about the idea of strategic manufacturing as being something new that you're doing, that you've been doing, and that you are the firm that for all 15 years has been doing this, early work that gets transferred to Jabil or something down the road, perhaps. So I'm just kind of curious, what's changed and why do we need strategic manufacturing? And, is that really different, or you just put a new buzzword on something you've always been doing?
Well, I think nothing changed. I think this has been a common issue forever. I mean, large contract manufacturers, what's their ideal client? It's a client that can predict their forecast at very high volumes for a long period of time. And startups can't do that. Even though they think they can, many times they can't, or they're over exaggerating. And the CMs many times have lived through the pain of trusting that forecast, and it doesn't always come to fruition. It usually takes longer than it's anticipated to scale. And so there is a gap of where there are a lot of contract manufacturers that, especially in the med device field, that are once bitten, twice shy, that they're just want to make the startups jump through so many hoops that they just can't get started on that early manufacturing to get to those early animal studies, maybe a human study, and maybe it isn't fully scaled for design for manufacturing for scaling. Because, of the 100 startup clients we've worked with in the last 15 years, I've never seen one funded correctly to get to full scale. It just doesn't happen in the startup world. And I think it's a failure in the startup world. And it's underestimated how long it's going to take. And I think we take the brunt of the early end of that, you never have enough time and money to do it perfect or correctly, or even close to correctly. You have to do it fast and you have to do it well. And then when you transfer it to contract manufacturing, it's never to the level that they want to accept. So we have a gap in there for strategic manufacturing where we have our D&I group that's right there that can help with changes online as it happens. And then as you're manufacturing that product, inevitably those first times you're manufacturing, there are problems. So we're there to get there very quickly and solve those problems, and hopefully get that when it's running through that strategic manufacturing ready to get to scale, whether that's with us or with another client, having that flexibility to do that.
Got it. Okay. So that's really important to understand that you're thinking of things in that way. And as you said, if you've had 100 clients and none of them have ever properly funded to scale, that's not good. So So hopefully they're listening to your advice.
But there's things you can plan around there as well. It really depends on what your plans are.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think that's probably part of what I want to try and, hopefully impart today in terms of wisdom is that there are things you can do to plan for these things,
Right.
that put some seeds in the ear of people on your team or your board or whomever, of things that can, the things that we need to be thinking about as organizations. Josh, let me jump over to you for a second here, because something that, I keep hearing from people, this idea of, well, we're going to mitigate risk in our supply chain by buying 6 months or a year or 2 years worth of stuff that we might need later. Is that a good idea? Is that something you're seeing? And what's going on out there?
We are seeing that. There's been a scramble to buy as much product, I think, or componentry as possible. It's a big risk. And some companies can mitigate that risk. For example, large companies that we work for, that we work with as a manufacturer, they're not going to be as impacted if they have to write down, a loss on some component, or the component changes, or their timeline is incorrect to market, as Eric noted. So I think in a startup world, though, it's different. You have to be a little more cautious about big purchases like that, especially in an early stage of a device where you may still have revisions to make. You may not be at a design freeze stage for certain components. I think back to what Jim was saying, with regard to the supply chain, I think, there's a certain level of flexibility now that, maybe we didn't have to have in designing these things before the supply chain got upended. But I think the more design flexibility you can do, the less reliance on a sole supplier, a single part, or something that's maybe gonna suddenly not be available for 18 months. The more you can hedge against that, the better.
One of the things that comes to mind as you're talking about complex parts and everything is something that Jim and I have talked about a lot, which is simplicity, and this whole idea that I don't know, maybe I'm oversimplifying. Talk about simplicity to say that engineers want to be fancy and come up with cool new things and look at all this great new stuff in our product, and that it does, and we're trying to solve all these incredible medical challenges, right? And with new technology. But does a device have to be crazy complex to do that and still be exciting to the industry, or is simplicity the answer, especially in the world that we're in now with some of the new things in supply chain? And what exactly does simplicity mean, Jim?
Sure, Paul. So, 1 second, I'll jump back to something Eric was saying earlier, because I think it's an extremely important point. He's right. When you start to scale and you get ready for large form manufacturing, it is a bigger gap than most people anticipate. And having a partner like Rev1 or an ERI group, someone that's in there that's executing a strategy that prepares you for scale, that often helps the suppliers understand where that product is going and the pathway forward. So I think it's a very vital link to what we're doing between startups and going to large form scale. When I think about simplicity in that, I often look at overcomplicated QMS systems and manufacturing practices that can be refined at that stage. Makes it a lot easier to lift it and put it in place. And hopefully it shortens that cash runway with regards to what Eric was saying, where someone's not funded just right. So I wanted to mention that because I think it's extremely important to remember. You've got to have that link in your partnership and preparation. If you were to bring a startup into Jabil right now, they would suffer a lot of costs, and it's just because of how much our overhead cost is when you drop a line in. And now to circle back to your original question, Paul, and I apologize. I thought that was important to state. The simplicity aspect of it. I've talked about this multiple times, where there's a lot of good companies out there that'll offer you field service engineers who will come in and sell you a chip, and to do that, they'll lay out the board for you. Well, it's a lot like a mom and pop using SAP, right? They don't need it. They don't need a massive ERP system. They need just little bits of it. And when I think about simplicity, I don't mean get rid of capabilities. I mean, in a lot of cases, move that to your software. Don't rely on one chip to rule the whole board. So break it up into microprocessors and in a handful of resistors, do the work, take the time to make it easier on yourself. get away from an 18, 24-week lead time component, get it down to what you actually need. And I think that simplicity is really what we're seeing the winners make those moves toward in this environment. And I think we're going to continue to see that. But I don't think that we lose on the technology. I don't think that the lack of over-engineering is going to impact the product or reduce the capabilities. You just have to be wise with where you put your money and where you decide you're going to design in complexity. And there's still going to be some there, but pick and choose is kind of my rule of thumb.
Yeah, if I could add something, I think that with early startups, your main focus is getting something that works. And the danger in that is that sometimes getting something to work isn't necessarily what's going to work long term, or could even possibly work long term. You know, we've had examples where you have founders come in and they have a patent, they have a really firm idea that they have to have nitinol in this product, and because nitinol is a catchword and it has to be there. And one of the first things we do is we try to teach them that, you know, we'll do finite element analysis, prove that, you know, stainless steel works and it's easier to weld to other products, and there's easier ways to do that. And so, you know, hate to say it, but early on, you have to start when you're first looking at the design, you have to have people that understand the future, where it's going to go, the cost involved in that, even though they may not know the cost of goods at that time, but to try and design out things that aren't necessary at the beginning. And keeping it simple, fine, that's a good thing to say, but sometimes that's not making the design simple. Sometimes it's harder to design out things that are difficult or supply chains can be difficult for. But doing that early on the pain chart, like I always tell everyone, the pain chart is on the X graph is your time, and on the Y is the pain. And the further you get down that path, and then when you're transferring something to manufacturing, you have a component in there that doesn't work, your pain is a lot more than at that early design phase.
That's a very good way of putting it. That the pain is going to be a lot more. Josh, you wanted to say something?
I was just going to add to what Eric said, and we've seen this too, where you almost have, you know, two design cycles where you design the product and you build the product into, you know, this peak of cost, and then you go through a second design cycle, which is, hey, we got to take all the cost out of this. You know, we get customers coming in, they say we want to reduce our COGS by $50 to $60 per component, per part, and you kind of think about it and you go, well, you know, if this had been done on the back end, or, you know, on the front end, you wouldn't still be trying to pull cost out of this. And so, you know, I would say be mindful of it. Sometimes, you know, things are more readily available. You know, they're more expensive, whatever, you have a reason for using them on the front end. You know, if you can put more thought into that as far as overall cost, and at least be mindful of it. You know, obviously you want it to work. So you're going to be pushing for a viable product first and foremost, but the more cost you can pull out of it initially, you know, the less work you have in subsequent revisions.
Good point. All three of you work with startups, so it's not like, oh, you only work with Jabil 3 years later or 2 years later or whatever, or Fujikura or Rev One. So I just want to throw something at you, Jim, for a second, which is, you know, again, you know, I know you're one of, you know, as you said, you're the largest manufacturer of medical devices in the world. That's a fact. And I hear from, you know, our strategic partners all the time. I'll say, like, what are you doing all day? And they're like, we're transferring stuff to Jabil, and you know, like, so I know that that you see a ton of things. What are some of the things that, if a startup comes to you early, and I know you talk to all of the startups really in MedTech Innovator at very early stages, so it's not like you're waiting for them 3 years later. So my question for you is, like, what's some of the things that you're telling them that they're surprised about? What are some of the things that you're telling them that they go, oh my God, I'm going to go back and, you know, make a change or think about something differently? So what are some of those things that by talking to you early, they're going to learn?
Well, what I think that you'll find is, you know, I'm agnostic as a lot of cases to where people build. I just want them to be able to build and get their product to market. I think that's usually a surprise. I'm not looking to hook everybody in. I feel like if I bring in startups at the wrong time, all I'm going to do is burn their cash without them getting their results. So I think they're surprised by that I'm not going to oversell. I think they're also surprised that similar to whether it was cooler heads, telemetry, or suture guard, they come to us with a question or a problem, and we either help them solve it, or we find somebody that's else in the industry that we can pass them along to. I think we have a pretty large network of folks, and I'm not, for those chats, I think it's often surprising is, well, how much is this going to cost? Well, it's not going to cost you anything to have a chat with me and me to give you our suggestions. I think specifically on some of the parts, when people come to us with what I would consider very elegant manufactured products, they're surprised to find out that is going to be impossible to meet the scale that they're going to need, whether it's not ready for automation, or the supply chain isn't there, or the massive amount of obsolescence that they didn't know they designed in because they didn't do a supply chain review while they were designing it. I think the biggest thing is the fact that supply chain has to be involved early. A lot of the discussions I have is, do you realize that this chip manufacturer that you spec'd in is going to be out of business in 2 months? Are you aware that this is being sold to somebody who may shelve the technology because it competes with one of their other devices? So I think that's the big thing. I think a lot of cases, people would come to me and ask about cost, how can I make this cheaper? But what they get surprised by is the lack of robustness in their supply chain. I think that's the big one for me.
And is that new? I'm just curious, the idea of having the supply chain team integrated with the design team. Is that a new thing? Is that just because of the pandemic, or has this been around for a while?
So it's been a practice we've driven inside of Jabil for as long as I can remember. The supply chain professionals are absolutely vital to helping the engineers select who they're using and the technology they're using. I think a lot of times it's an afterthought, unfortunately, or engineers get stuck in their own head and they have someone they want to use, and this is my go-to guy, and this is who I want to run with. We try to break that, because we really want the supply chain to have a voice in that process. We want it to be loud enough that it makes sense. So a couple of my customers got burned by this during the pandemic and even before, and they're dealing with it now. And they've set into a process that when engineering wants to make a change, it has to get approved by supply chain. Where before it was just, hey, supply chain, go buy this part, I've already decided. And I think that's extremely important, especially when you prepare for scale. You can imagine, like you mentioned, we've seen some things that are very small in the product world, but just completely trip up the manufacturing. That's something that could have been worked out ahead of time with either a supply chain discussion or a partnership agreement. So every product, every piece on every product right now is vital, and supply chain knows ins and outs of whether those are going to be partners for you when you go to production. So I think it's extremely vital.
It is vital, and it's been around since I started in '95. I worked on a team for supply chain, and we always had those integrated with design. I think that what you're seeing in early startups is they don't have the resourcing to hire supply chain managers. I mean, that is not going to be their number one hire. So I don't think it's feasible, or even if I was an investor, to say that you need to hire someone to be supply chain. And that's why I think all of us on the board are obviously going to be biased, but I think finding a development partner is actually very, very important, because you're going to have someone that does this full time all the time. And they have those contacts, they have the suppliers, they have some advice. And I think if I would have advice for that, is when you sit down and you're trying to find that partner, if you are going down that route, really listen to what they're saying are challenges, because I think that it falls on deaf ears many times when we have conversations with startups, because it's not on the top of their list of things to do. And they don't even take it as, this is also a stopper. You can have a good design, but if you can't get the source of the product, it's going to be a stopper. And so I don't think they really, when we say it's going to take a lot longer to do design for manufacturing than you think, they go, sure, no, but ours is going to be easy. It's going to be different, and it's never different. They all have the same challenges.
Yeah. Let me ask one kind of related question, which is like design freeze. And knowing when's the time to freeze design. Everyone wants this product to be as perfect as it can be, perhaps, or maybe it's the opposite. Maybe it's people going, no, minimal viable product. I'm just curious. I'm going to start with you on this, Eric, which is how do you advise clients as to when it's a good time for design freeze? Is it some amount of market testing? Like what are the general principles that you use?
I was literally in talking with my COO with one of our clients today, because we're transferring to manufacturing, and questioning the process at times, because the ideal world, you get to design freeze, you stop, and then you start thinking about manufacturing, because manufacturing, and now you can throw it over the wall and they can start working on it and everything's complete and done and perfect. and that never happens. And you can't do that in the startup world. You have to be very lean and very fast. And so we do overlap into, we're not at design freeze yet, but we're also starting up manufacturing, and you have to be flexible in the manufacturing. That's kind of why we've seen that is when you hand it over to a different company or anything else, you have to interact quite a bit. And so we were just talking, like, should we have stopped the client and make sure we get the design freeze before we start the manufacturing, because it's much more messier right now? And the answer is we can't. We have to be smarter and have more people and have more planning in order to plan for those overlaps, so that if there's one thing hanging up design freeze, you're not going to skip that in the process. You have that phase review. You have to have that before you actually manufacture. But that doesn't mean in planning you can't start planning the manufacturing as well, or V&V or those kind of things. So we do both, and I think that it is the only answer for startups, because you have to run lean and fast at the same time.
Yeah, and I think it's, to wait until you have the perfect product. Obviously, you can't do that. At some point you just have to freeze the design. To me, it's about risk. Again, how much risk can you put on the manufacturer? How much risk can you take that the product you're developing, isn't going to change, or the change that's going to be made beyond this is not going to affect the manufacturer in a profound way. So, this is where, too, sometimes we understand what the device does, but understanding how your device is made at a not just on a bench level, but how your manufacturer is choosing to manufacture it, can give you a sense of where those failure points are, where those risk points are on the manufacturing side. And there's a tendency, I think, to just say, oh, well, I have a contract manufacturer for that, I'm gonna rely on their expertise. But the communication with them and understanding where they're going to run into problems, and if you're going to cause more headaches for the manufacturer, given either parts of your design that are unfrozen or parts of your design that may be difficult to manufacture, the sooner you can identify those, the better assessment of risk you'll be able to make.
Joshua, that's exactly it too. At least you can do, it doesn't cost a lot to plan. Mm-hmm. So in our plans, you look forward and you go, okay, what is going to bite us in manufacturing? Let's pull those risks forward and at least start working on those now. Certain things are known and certain things aren't known. If you don't know it, pull that forward as far as you can.
Yep.
Josh, I'm wondering, you, as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking about the advice you give our startups. So you mentor a lot of companies in our program. All three of your organizations are involved in mentoring. But Josh, I'm just curious. So what are some of the things when you're talking to people, who are in our program, which are companies that are at some point usually in their design process? Maybe they're still in development at some level. Some of them obviously are later and they're in clinicals and all that. But if you're going to be giving them advice, I'm just curious, what are some of the things that you're telling them that, again, are surprises or are things that again, not naming a specific company, but what are some of the things that are concerning to you, I guess is what I would say, when you're talking to, whether it's our companies or any early company. So I'd love some of your thoughts.
Yeah, and maybe this is moving too far afield of the design discussion, but when you're considering supply agreements, to me it's an easy place to get burned, because you assume that as a startup we're a new company, we're a small company, we don't have a ton of money, we're not doing a bunch of volume with these people. We'll take the boilerplate supply agreement and we'll run with it. And I think that's kind of a mistake, because there's a lot of things in that agreement that you can get tripped up on. It could be pricing. You want to run it by your lawyers. You want to think about the actual implications of what happens if my manufacturing costs shoot up. Or a component cost shoots up. Who's going to share that burden? Is there a way we can come to a more mutual sharing of some of this, the burden of a cost increase based on, us the startup being able to continue manufacturing with you, and you, the manufacturer, being able to continue manufacturing our product. And so, trying to find a more balanced, equitable solution. I've found startups are oftentimes too, I guess, too focused on their position in the market as new, and maybe they're thinking, well, I'll take what somebody will give me, or this is a standard agreement. But I think it's worth a lot of scrutiny and negotiation, especially if you're going to be under it for extended period of time.
Good advice, and that's not too far afield. I'm glad it's very related to what we're talking about. So thanks for bringing that up. One of the things that I know comes up a lot is this question of, how much can we do in-house and how much can we outsource? I was just visiting one of our companies recently who's doing everything in-house. They're not working, I think they're literally building everything in-house, and manufacturing and shipping and everything in-house. I'm curious, is that common? Or do people usually just kind of like 3D print some stuff in the beginning and then they start working with companies like you? Or, are people still working in their garage? Someone on LinkedIn sent a question who's listening to this discussion and said, are people still in their garage building things, or is it all outsourced these days? So I'm just kind of curious to get a sense from you guys on that in general. Whoever wants to go first.
Well, we've seen them all. I think we've advised many of we had one of them that just recently that wanted to start their own manufacturing because they were scared to death that having someone else manufacture it, they would see their secret sauce and didn't want them to see it. Albeit our advice was to not do that, and that it wasn't that novel. And it's very, very short-sighted in that they want to start. They have a 2,000 square foot clean room and they want to start, but they have plans of scaling and selling their item to every hospital in the world. Well, what's your next step? What's your next step? You just invested in your own manufacturing that in California where there's no space and no buildings. And what's your next step to scale? You can't. You're going to have to find a partner that's willing to pick that up. And the minute you think you need to scale, you're 18 months too late. So I think that, we tend to tell them not to go down that path, and look at the large companies. Many of them have chosen to outsource all manufacturing so they can focus on product development, sales, all the things they need to do. And I think that, stay in your lane is a good topic of discussion, because if I'm CEO and I've started a few different companies, I shore up every area that I don't understand very well and put an expert in place. Why wouldn't you do this? You do that with regulatory. You do that with other items, your lawyers. You don't try to be a lawyer. So why would you try to either manufacture product or develop product if that hasn't been your thing your whole career?
Yeah, I would just, sorry,
go ahead.
I was just going to add to that, Eric. I 100% agree that there's some things people can do in-house early on and they can get ready. I think to be careful there, because when you start entering into your validation process for manufacturing, if you've documented things incorrectly, you're just causing yourself a whole lot of trouble in how it relates back to your 510K. I would also say that you like you said, you don't know what you don't know. A lot of people think it's easy to manufacture. It is. If you want to make one, you can make one. You want to make 10,000, you might have a problem. And I think this is where I see the big opportunity for Rev One is using that bridge ahead of, we can't go to Jabil, so we have to do it ourselves. No, you need to get with a Rev One. You need to get with somebody who can start that and do it the right way, and maybe even partner with a Jabil to make sure that when it's time to go to scale, you can lift and shift. But I think there are some times when I see IP related concerns where I say, okay, that one process, you get last touch, but everything else ahead of that, we need to be doing it. But the other part that scares me is when someone says, I'm going to do the last process in my house. And I think, okay, well, what happens when I keep pumping production and you can't keep up with what I'm shipping you? Are you ready to pay me for that while it sits and you're not turning orders? So there's a lot to consider. And for those of us that have been in manufacturing a short time or a long time, you quickly realize just how complex it gets when you try to go to scale. And you need to find a partner, whether it's a Rev One or somebody like that. That's going to be vital in order to understanding that you don't know what you don't know real quick.
Well, and I think they have all the flexibility in the world. I think they go to Jabil and I would advise them to do that now if they're coming to us, because we would go to them if we knew that ahead of time and go, hey, this is our design for manufacturing. That doesn't mean it's your design for manufacturing, because you might have more access to vertical integration. You have more access to automation. We may not have access to that. So like I say to a lot of our clients, design for manufacturing isn't designed for manufacturing. It's designed for our manufacturing or a company's manufacturing that we're taking it to if we know how they do manufacture. So it's very important that people think it's just a three-letter word or acronym. It's so much more complex than that.
Yeah, and it's not standard across the board. I mean, you know, my Valor rules for DFM are going to be different than yours depending on your gear set. So things like that, I think people take for granted, and they do. They think it's an acronym that is the same everywhere, and it's not. So that's a great point.
And if you're scaling, your DFM activities, if you're large scale and you have automation that have a lot of things to do, could cost you more than your early development. And that's shocking too. If you're asking for something that could be shocking advice to startup companies, that can be shocking.
Yeah, Paul, you asked about advice I give. I mean, this what Jim and Eric are saying is absolutely true. And you know, anytime you have to change between two, you know, highly competent manufacturers, between, you know, shifting from Rev 1 to Jabil, there's a risk. There's a risk that something changes. There's a risk that your product isn't, you know, exactly the same as you've been either, you know, testing or delivering. And so I think there's, you know, that's something you have to think about and mitigate going forward. What we find typically is, you know, we see a drift where somebody will say, oh, we just want components. And then at some point they go, you know, this is proving to be a little more difficult than we thought. Can we get a sub-assembly? And then, you know, eventually, and this, you know, this even occurs with very large companies, you know, that we manufacture for. You know, eventually they'll just go, hey, how about we just throw the whole design to you guys, and you send us a finished product.
Yeah, so, no, I'm sure that is common. So when we talk to companies, they, you know, they'll tell us all sorts of things about, you know, the process and, you know, horror stories. Something popped up, like, you know, I'll talk to a company and they'll say, oh, we had a big delay because, you know, we had some part that we couldn't, you know, we never thought was going to be important. One of our companies mentioned this, you know, a gold pin that had to be folded 90 degrees and they couldn't get it to be repeatable. I'm just curious, and they were like, that had, you know, they're building a sensor and they didn't think a gold pin was going to be the holdup. So my question for the three of you is, and you can think about this a little bit too as we're going through here, is some stories, anecdote, without again naming a company, but just things that, you know, have tripped up clients along the way. That, you know, again, they weren't expecting, that might be educational for the people who are listening here today, where they might see themselves in these stories and go, oh my gosh, yeah, you know, that could be us too. So, you know, just think about it for a little bit. Any particular stories, you know, it just could be anything, something minor, not a, you know, a long story, but something that somebody wasn't expecting, and, you know, and it caused, you know, either a major delay or they had it, whatever it is. I'm just kind of curious if you have any anecdotes. Anyone want to go first?
I can. So we have lots of them. The first one that came to mind is one we did a little while ago, and they had curved needles that went through the vessel wall, and they had to cut a shape, a non-coring shape, into a needle, which has been done for 30, 40 years. Non-coring tips on needles are a very common thing. But it's a nitinol needle that's curved. Well, the nitinol can't be shaped after the tip is cut. So you have to put a non-coring tip onto a nitinol needle. Never been done before. I mean, no company has been asked to do it. So you go to, the assumption was we can go to all the needle manufacturers and they'll just say, hey, I'll make that. And that assumption was very, very incorrect. So we had to develop a process and then train other manufacturers to do that process. So that took much more time. So, you know, that's one example where you have to innovate and be different, because there is no supplier for a first-in-kind type device many times.
Great example, Eric. Thank you for that one. Anybody else want to share something? Jim?
Yeah, I would say, Josh, go ahead. You go first.
No, I was going to say, you know, at a little higher level than a needle. You know, I know of a case where there was a specific component design, you know, unique technology, and you know, just kind of seemingly innocuous news of a you know, company being kind of spun off of the company, the parent company. So people are approaching this as, oh, there's a large stable manufacturer. There's a, this part's going to be available forever. And, we don't have anything to worry about in our supply chain. And then, you realize that, okay, this new entity, what does the new entity look like? Is it, if somebody buys that, acquires that, am I still going to be able to get my components? And, we look at it from the manufacturing side, but, on that business and I would say kind of corporate structural side, if your company gets acquired and suddenly that product gets cut, how bad is that for you?
That could be really bad. Right? It could be terrible.
No, I would just add, Paul, the last thing I've got is I think a lot of people are surprised that they think they can automate a product and they don't really understand the lead time or the cost of automation. And especially when you say, I want to do 10,000 units a month, and then they say, oh, I want to do 100,000. They don't understand that 10,000 is going to run on one machine, but to get to 100,000 or 1,000,000 units, it's going to be significantly different. So it's an exponential cost model when it comes to high form or high scale automation. I don't think in a lot of cases when folks are doing their investment models, they're capturing that. They're thinking, well, if it's 100,000 to do 10,000, then if I want to do 1,000,000, then you do the math, and it's like, no, it's not the same. So I think that's a surprise sometimes for people when they start looking at exactly how much market they plan to capture and how much they want to manufacture. It does throw them off a bit at times.
It does, Jim. The bright side of that is that many of the startups don't have to live through that cycle, but they have to plan for that. So we've had some of our companies acquired, and they know that they have to go through automation. They've gone to companies. We've taken them to companies that can give them quotes for the automation. They can give them estimates of time to do that. And it hasn't delayed them from getting acquired, because I don't think the acquirer necessarily cares about that scaling cost. They care about the time and not disruption to, if they do acquire that and they're selling that product, they don't want a disruption and an unknown there. So you can do some legwork in planning to kind of speculate as to what that's going to take, so that an acquirer can take the risk out of that without necessarily having to spend that money, and your investors have to spend that money. But you have to know that.
Yeah, it's the important thing, I think, is to educate your investors. And to do that, you have to educate yourself. And so if you plan for that need of investment, you're not coming back around again and again saying, oh, I need more, I need more. I do think it is. It's all about that legwork up front.
Actually, in this, maybe just thinking something too, Eric, that you were saying earlier in our discussion, which is, that people don't budget properly. They don't raise enough capital, for manufacturing and all these things. So I'm just kind of curious, again, with the benefit of all this hindsight, what are just some pieces of advice that you'd give people who are listening out there about things that they should, be budgeting for, or is it like you're building a house and you go, oh, well, it's going to take twice as long and cost twice as much? I mean, is there, what are some pieces of advice, again, that you could give to somebody that you wish, if you were, you could have told them 2 years ago when you started working with them?
Well, careful what you wish for and what you hope for, because what you hope for isn't going to be exactly the way you hope it. So, for example, whenever anyone comes to me, I take it, it's like you're a contractor building a house. They come to you and go, hey, I want a house for $300,000. The contractor will give you a quote, a house for $300,000, but he knows that when you go to pick out your flooring, you're not going to want linoleum. You're going to want tile. You're not going to want a plastic toilet. You're going to want porcelain. So he knows that, but he'll never get that job because he's competing with other companies to get that job if he quotes the highest cost and what he actually knows you're going to spend. And it's not exactly like that for us, but it kind of is, because we put a plan together that has a timeline and a budget, and it has a range, a high risk range and a low risk duration. And most companies, against our advice, assume that they're going to hit it earlier and with less money. And sometimes they fund for that, where we advise them, fund for the higher. And if you go beyond, I get it, you're getting diluted, but most likely it's going to be on the higher end. And we tell them honestly that it's going to be at the higher end. And the downside, so what I'm saying is, when you ask for a quote and you're asking for those, don't be shocked necessarily that the costs are higher. Ask why, and look at the in things in the plan and ask why, and really accept that as it could be the truth from experienced people, that they're not just, you can't just hope that you're going to be easier than anyone else.
Yeah, and Paul, that was something that when Ted Wright put together that playbook, that was the intent, was to help people understand what costs could be coming their way. It's not saying that, oh, if you do it with Jabil, this is how much it's going to cost. We took it across the industry. Because a lot of times what scares me the most is if I quote something for $2 million and the person says, well, so-and-so will do it for 250. Well, I guarantee you by the time so-and-so is done with it, you're probably going to spend 2.5 million, because we've seen it time and time again, even unfortunately with some of the previous MedTech cohort members that came to us and we said, it's going to cost this much. I follow up with them 2 years later and find out they're, 3 or 4 in the hole on it. So, it's sometimes it's hard to be honest, because a lot of people are like, no, I want to trust the guy who says a lower number. But ultimately, total cost of ownership is total cost of ownership. It's going to come to bear.
Yep. And certain costs you push off are going to cost you more in the future. And do you want to be, if you're a CEO of one of these startup companies, do you want to be the guy going back to your board for more money because you underestimated, or do you want to go back to the board being the wise CEO that you are, that you listen to your advisors, to your contracted help, and you planned for those things and you used it accordingly?
I want to be that guy. That's for sure. Because I can tell you over and over again, we see this problem. I've seen it. I was a VC for 12 years. I saw it then as well, where, people, again, came in with an estimate, whether it was for their regulatory work, whether it's for their manufacturing, whatever it is. And they say, like, these are the numbers, and they fund to that. And maybe with a little bit of buffer, and they're way off. And then, as you said, then they're coming back to us and going, we're sorry, this is going to cost more. And can we do an inside round to bridge us to, get to now to finish it the way it was supposed to be done? And those are painful. Right. And that's where venture capitalists become vulture capitalists and all those things that we hear about. But that's, you have to plan, appropriately. And so it's really one thing that it struck me as you guys were talking in this last little bit is, about trusting, as you said, about trusting these experts that you're working with. What expertise, if I'm outsourcing a lot of this work to Rev1, to Fujikura, to Jabil, what expertise do I need to have in-house to tell me whether or not, you guys are right, or what should I listen to, or do I just blindly say, yes, absolutely, of course. Do you expect, or do you advise people to have, again, a lot of these companies are small shops with 3 people or 4 people or a dozen, and they don't have somebody who's got all this expertise. So do they need to hire like another consultant to be like a second set of eyes to work with you if they don't have the would that make your lives easier? Like, what do you recommend for people in terms of in-house expertise? Anyone?
I can go, because we do this quite a bit. We have so many examples of the startups that worked very well, and we have so many clear examples of what makes that work well and ones that don't. And the ones that work well, that obviously are funded, that can be difficult sometimes, but the ones that have expertise in the areas that we can't be the experts. And we're very clear with our clients, the ones that we are not experts on. So many are very myopic on engineering, and that being the primary thing that they have to control. But I can tell you from everyone on the board and everything, this is their career, this is what they do. There's no one out there that's trying to really take you for anything. They're trying to make their margin and not anymore, and they're trying to help you in the industry. And so, but you have to shore up your other things. We cannot look at the market for you. We cannot look at the whether reimbursement is going to be there. We can't guarantee that the FDA the regulations aren't going to change, and we've had that happen on us. So there's certain things that you can bring in-house to manage your outside sources. And ideally, you have the funding to have at least a VP of R&D. We've acted like that for some of our clients, a VP of regulatory, and your CEO is going to spend the majority of his time with investors, and they're going to get sucked up by that. So you need someone that's going to run operations a little bit. So you need to at least have the base there, and then you need to have your CTO and your CMO, the people that know your product very well and how it's going to be used. I think that's the core team that you should have. And then you can outsource a lot of the other stuff, but many of those companies can't do that for you. They can't run your business for you.
Yeah, I would say one key for me has been, I love it when the customer comes with a well-seasoned program manager, someone that can herd the cats on our side and their side, and we can have our program manager work with them. I think, time is money in the startup world, and a good program management officer is extremely important. And I think that's may not be the most technical, but man, they get things done.
100%.
Yeah, operations, experience definitely helps. And it doesn't have to be a, formal operations person, but if you have, if you're a CEO and you have knowledge of that, it goes a long way. I think where we see, potential for improvement is often especially in the market adoption kind of modeling that a company does. That's always a slower process than anyone thinks it's going to be. I mean, you think, oh, we've got this product, it's brand new, it's going to take off like wildfire. There's no solution in the market for it. It doesn't. And so the better you understand, how fast it's going to be adopted into the market, the better you can model that, the easier it is to work with your manufacturers, in setting volumes and helping to scale.
Yeah, it's funny you say that because they wouldn't think a contract manufacturer or manufacturer should have any input on that.
Right.
But you do because it's bitten you before.
Yep. Yeah, and it's great if it does take off. Sometimes products will take off and then they'll kind of plateau and they go, oh, we assumed it was going to keep growing forever until we hit our maximum total addressable market, so just because there's not a product out in the market and you have no competition, you're essentially competing to put your product into people's hands, and that competition is harder than you think it is.
Yeah, I tell people divide the revenue plan by 3 and multiply the takeoff by 5 and see if the numbers still work out. And you kind of have to do that. I even do that with my own business when I'm dealing with large OEMs. I'll take what they say as their opportunity. I'll divide by 2 and I'll multiply by 3 how long it's going to take to get there, and I'll work the numbers and see if it still works out. I think we all are really optimistic when it's our product and our plan. But you have to remember there's a lot of people that are going to be involved, and there's a lot of scenarios that can throw off that timeline. So be prepared to pay for it and be prepared to wait for it.
Exactly. It's kind of like your break-even analysis. How much can you keep cash flow going while you're scaling, and can you survive that scaling if it goes to 3 times a time?
Yeah, it's not just a startup problem either. I mean, like Jim pointed out, it happens with the large OEMs as well. And they've got a dedicated sales force, and they've got an entire team of marketers out there, seemingly going through every account going, how many of these can we, how many procedures are being done, and how many of these can we put in people's hands? And it's just never accurate.
Something we only have a minute or so left in the YouTube portion and the LinkedIn Live portion of this. I know it's crazy the hour's gone by. But what I wanted to do is I wanted to wrap up with 2 things. Number one, obviously, thank you guys for an amazing discussion. There's so much on this topic that we could get into, and so many things to unpack. It could be 4 hours easily. Yeah. And still not scratch the surface. One thing I wanted to just put out there in general is that all of your companies are involved in different ways, or and have services that aren't just design, that aren't just manufacturing. This, I think it's clear that it's from some of the comments that all of you made. Josh was just saying something a minute ago, is that there's regulatory and reimbursement, and not that you're a regulatory firm or not that you're a reimbursement expert, but you guys are involved one way or another in a lot of things that happen as a result of that. And I know you're aware of those things, which is why we love having you guys as partners and mentors, because it isn't just about designing and choosing a chip or something like that. It's about how is this going to fit into the clinical workflow, and what is FDA? Eric, you were saying some things about that before. What are they going to do with this new procedure or new thing we're doing? So I want to make sure everyone who's out there watching understands that you can talk to these companies about some of those things as well, and they'll understand. They're not just going to manufacture the product. They're thinking of this thing as holistically as it is. So So I want to make sure everyone understands that. And the last thing I wanted to do here is just give each of you just a minute just to close with any thoughts, since we're reflecting back on now the last hour. Anything you want to share for people who are out there? Any last words? And then just tell people how they can they can find you. Is it on LinkedIn, whatever? I mean, of course, our cohort companies know how to find you, but someone who's watching on LinkedIn or YouTube, are you on LinkedIn? What's the easiest way to find you? I'll start with you, Josh.
All right. Yeah. LinkedIn. Connect with me. Send me an email. I think my email's on there as well. So, yeah, I guess I'd say I've been doing this 20 years and have been on the startup side, have been, on the large company, large manufacturing side. There's so many people it takes to bring one of these products to market. If I'm not the guy who can help you, hopefully I can get you to somebody who can. But that's I think that's maybe unique in this industry, but I think it's a very collegial, friendly relationship, even among competitors in this business, which is great.
Agree completely. I've watched you do that. I've watched all of you do that and introduce people to other vendors and suppliers and all sorts of things. So thank you. Eric, your turn.
Yeah, so I'm on LinkedIn. Make sure you message me and I'll get back to you. And if you just connect, I have a lot of connections, so I may not see that. But send me that, and if you have a question, I can answer a question, or I can refer you to someone that can answer that question within our company or outside our company even. And we're happy to do that. I enjoyed this because, one thing to keep in mind is I think that there isn't anyone here on this board per se, and a lot of the companies that have been around for a long time that want to take on a project that's going to be unsuccessful. So when they're giving you advice and where they want to go, listen to it, because if I take on a project, it ruins our brand, it ruins our mentality if we can't make you successful. So we most likely wouldn't take it if we don't have confidence we can do it. And I think that's probably true across the board here.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that, Eric. All right. And Jim.
Yep, LinkedIn for me too. I've been getting a lot of emails from the cohort this year around components. I think I've been able to help on a couple, but I'm not exactly batting 1,000 by any means. So I try to do my best. And if anything, I can forward you who I think a good source might be that you could connect with and maybe build a relationship with. But we're always open to conversations. And Paul, as you mentioned, I know Josh and I have done it plenty of times. So we had an opportunity with folks, and if it doesn't fit us, but we know someone that we'll not only make that introduction, but we'll have the call with them to kick it off. I think these are important devices, and we want to see them get to the market, and we want to do what we can. If that doesn't mean the production comes to Jabil, that's okay. We want to be here as support, and I think that's a big part. As Brian Benson always says, the MedTech Innovator is the award. So we want to be able to keep that up and be able to help and not worry about what's going to happen 2-3 years down the road, but let's do the right thing to make this move forward.
I couldn't agree more. The program is the prize, right? And getting to work with, companies like yours, I think really, as I said, is the prize. And as Brian has said many times as well. Thank you for quoting that, Jim. So, and again, it's important for everyone out there listening to understand these are people that are in this business, know this business, are happy to talk to you. It doesn't cost anything to have that phone call and to reach out and say, hey, I'd like to just get to know you and tell you a little about what we're doing and see if there might be a fit for us to do something together. And the answer might be not a fit for us or not a fit for, at this stage, but whatever, but they will give you advice and listen. And, you're not going to get a bill at the end of that phone call. That's why these companies, are here and participating in MedTech Innovators. They want to connect with people like you. So thank you all for doing that. And just for being such great parts of our ecosystem. Really appreciate it. All right, guys. So for all of you who are out there on YouTube or LinkedIn, I know I didn't get to all your questions. Please feel free to message, reach out to Jim and Josh and Eric on LinkedIn, as they said. Find them, dig them up, email them if that's the way, and do follow up. There was a question that someone asked that was more of a regulatory question, and this webinar wasn't really as much about regulatory, so I'm not getting to that topic today. But I do want to encourage you who are out there watching, stay tuned. We offer these webinars weekly, and there's no cost to watch them. Hopefully, you also go to medtechinnovator.org/live, which is where we have the archives of all of our past webinars. You can find them on YouTube as well, but it's easier if you just go to our website, medtechinnovator.org/live. If you're curious about the Asia Pacific markets, you could go to medtechinnovator.org/APAC live. And you can learn about those markets. You could also go to biotoolsinnovator.org to watch our webinar series for the biotools and life sciences industry. So the point is, there's a lot of great resources. We hope you'll come back. Thank you for being here today. Cohort's going to stick around as our panelists so we can get to some Q&A. But for those of you out there on YouTube and LinkedIn, thanks for joining us. And we will look forward to seeing you again, hopefully very soon.